Hello, everyone. This is Rick Wycheck, the director of NAEHS and the director of the National Toxicology Program. I would like to welcome all of you to the 164th meeting of the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council. As I explained to members of council about an hour ago, I had wished that we would be able to do this in person in our newly renovated Broadbell Auditorium this year. But it looks like once again, the pandemic and COVID-19 is getting in the way. So let's hope that with the dissemination of vaccinations that we will sometime, maybe even in February of 2022, we'll be able to meet together in Broadbell Auditorium. So again, welcome to all of you. And I will turn it over to, I believe it's Pat Maston, is that correct? Or do we want Gary to make a few introductory comments before we turn it over to Pat?
This will be Gary's show, so he'll be taking it from here.
Gary, you're on.
Thank you, Rick, and welcome everyone. And I echo Rick's comments. I wish that I can see you all in person. So I'd like to read something that I think is very important that you should be aware of. Pursuant to the government and the Sunshine Act, all aspects of this meeting are open to the public except the review, discussion, and evaluation of grant applications and related information. So having said that, I'd like to go on and make sure that we introduce all of our members of council and members of the NAEHS Senior Leadership Committee. So I'll start with Dr. Lynn Goldman. Introduce yourself and your affiliation, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lynn Goldman, and I am Dean of the Milken Institute School of Public Health at the George Washington University and a member of the council.
Thank you, Lynn. Dr. Irva Hertz-Pichota.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Irva Hertz-Pichota. I'm at the University of California at Davis, where I direct the NIHS Environmental Health Sciences Center.
Thank you. Dr. Terry Kavanaugh.
Hello, my name is Terry Kavanaugh. I'm a professor at the University of Washington in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences.
Thank you, Terry. Dr. Katrina Korfmacher.
Hi, I'm from the Environmental Health Sciences Center at the University of Rochester, where I'm a professor of environmental medicine and chair of our community engagement corps.
Thank you, Katrina. Dr. Edith Parker.
Hi, I'm the Dean of the University of Iowa College of Public Health.
Okay, and Dr. Trevor Penning.
Hi, I'm Trevor Penning. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania, where I direct our Environmental Health Sciences Core Center.
Welcome, Trevor. And Dr. Marla del Pilar Perez Lugo.
Hi, Marla Perez Lugo here. I'm a professor of sociology and disaster studies at the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley.
Thank you, Marla. And Dr. Brad Rassett.
Brad Rassett, Washington University School of Medicine.
Thank you, Brad. Dr. Robin Tangwe.
Robin Tangwe, Oregon State University.
Thank you, Robin. Dr. Karen Vasquez.
Good morning, I'm Karen Vasquez. I am a professor and division head of pharmacology and toxicology at the University of Texas in Austin.
Thank you, Karen. Dr. Bob Wright.
I'm Bob Wright. I'm the director of the Institute for Extrazomic Research at Mount Sinai School of Medicine.
Thanks, Bob. Dr. Bill Sabulas.
Hello, I'm Bill Sabulas. I'm ex officio to the council. I'm representing CDC National Center for Environmental Health and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Suzanne Fitzpatrick.
Am I on now?
Yes.
Yes, Susie Fitzpatrick, FDA, Food and Drug Administration representative.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Dr. Andrew Geller.
Hi, I'm Andrew Geller. I'm also ex officio from the Office of Research and Development at the Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you. And now for members of our senior leadership team. You've heard from Dr. Warchick. I'm Gary Ellison. I am Acting Director of the Division of Extramural Research and Training and Executive Secretary of the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council. Next on our list is Dr. Michelle Bennett. Is Michelle on? Okay, Dr. Brian Berridge.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Berridge. I'm the Scientific Director for the Division of the National Toxicology Program.
Thank you, Brian. And Dr. Gwen Coleman.
Good morning, everyone. Gwen Coleman. I'm the Acting Deputy Director at NIEHS.
Thank you, Gwen. And Dr. Janet Hall.
Good morning. I'm Janet Hall, and I'm the Clinical Director at NIEHS.
Thank you. And Mitch Williams will be joining us later. He's our Acting Executive Officer at NIEHS. And next on our list is Dr. Daryl Zeldin.
Good morning, I'm Daryl Zeldin. I'm the DIR Scientific Director.
Thank you, Daryl, and welcome everyone. I just have a few housekeeping rules that I want to go over. So I mentioned that the meeting is being webcast, so it's important for microphones to be turned off after speaking and muted whenever you're not speaking. You may unmute your microphone when you're recognized. I also like to remind you to turn off your video and mute during all breaks. Another thing that I think is important to note is that members of the public who may wish to express views regarding any items discussed during the meeting may do so by sending an email to council using the address listed on the council webpage. That's national.advisory.council@niehs.nih.gov. Now, this email address could be used at any time before, during, or after council. Okay, next on our agenda is the consideration of the June 2021 meetings. And the meeting minutes are available on the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council webpage. And council members were asked to review the minutes before the meeting, which I'm sure they all did. And they are also included in the electronic council book. And so at this time, I'd like to request a motion to approve the meeting.
So
the
moved.
minutes. Okay, thanks, Terry. Second? Bob, any discussion?
I just had a one word correction. In the minutes, it said that I said something about the next step with research to action being interpretation. And I think what I meant was implementation, so evaluation of the impact of the program. So it's just one word, but it's qualitatively different in meaning.
Yeah, that's an important correction. Thank you.
Katrina, can you, your change, I need to make note of that. Can you tell me what you?
Could I just email you just so you can simply copy and paste? It's just changing the word interpretation to implementation.
That would be terrific.
And the direct quote for me. Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, may I get a motion to approve the minutes with that edit? Dr. Wright and Dr. Kavanaugh second. Any further discussion? Okay, please enter your vote electronically in the electronic council book. And I'm sorry, I need to mention that you're voting in favor or opposed, or you're abstaining.
We're good.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And so the next on our agenda is just for me to remind you about future meeting dates. Right now, we're having our meeting in September for 2021. Our next meeting is February 15th and 16th of 2022, our full council meeting. These dates are also located in the electronic council book on the general information tab. And so please make note of these dates and mark your calendars, and hopefully we'll get to see each other soon in person. I would love to see that happen for the next council, but I don't know where we are at this point. Okay, so that's all we have right now for our business and announcements, and I'd like to now turn the meeting over to Dr. Warchik.
Great, thanks very much, Gary. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
And Liz, I just sent you an email and asked you to send me the call-in information. My internet seems to be unstable at the moment. It just logged me out. So in the event that I get logged out again, I'll check my emails and call in and finish my presentation by phone. Okay, so let's get things started here. So could I have the first slide? Let me have the second slide. Okay, so let me start things off as I usually do with a discussion of the budget for FY22, which starts October 1st. So I went over the president's budget at our meeting last June, but since then, the fiscal year 2022 appropriations process has started in Congress. And on July 29th, the House passed the FY22 Appropriations Minibus, which is a bill that includes all of the funding measures and the proposed allocations for NIEHS. So it has NIEHS at a mark of about $942 million, which represents an increase of about $127 million from the FY21 enacted level. The report language allocates an increase of about $100 million specifically for climate change and health research for the NIH, and has additional language specific to NIEHS on harmful algal blooms and Parkinson's disease. Congress wants to make sure that there's a good focus in these two areas. So this amount passed in the House and is above, interestingly, it's actually above the president's FY22 request of about $937 million. Also, the House FY22 Interior and Environment Bill has approved about $83.5 million for the NIEHS Superfund related programs, which is just over $2 million above the FY21 enacted levels. So the report language supports the worker training program's efforts in responding to pandemics and disasters, as well as the NIEHS Superfund research programs on ongoing work with risk communications and their president's FY22 budget. So a $2 million increase, which is nice. So, okay, that's not a good sign. Okay, someone stop my video. Is that, okay, so Nathan.
Yes, sir. I can hear you now. We stopped your video just to increase your bandwidth capability, so we can still hear you.
Just let me know if for some reason I may have to call in here. I don't know what's going on.
Your audio is clear now, so we'll just keep your video off for right now.
I was actually planning to come into the office, but I decided that maybe the cable would actually hold up, but apparently not. So finally, the House FY22 Energy and Water Development Bill included report language to transfer $10 million from the Department of Energy to the NIEHS's worker training program, which is the same as it has been for the past several years. So when you add it all up, the House is recommending a budget that puts the NIH allocation at about $1,035.5 million, which, as you can see, is a pretty substantial increase over FY21. So I think that's a very encouraging sign. So for the NIH as a whole, the House bill provides a total of $49.6 billion which is an increase of 6.7 billion above the FY 2021 enacted level. So additionally, the bill includes about $3 billion to establish the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or what we call ARPA-H. And I think Congress's intention here is they want to accelerate, look to see. Okay, Nathan, the audio is steady? Okay.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So, and the ARPA-H is all about accelerating the pace of the scientific breakthroughs for biomedical research. And it's modeled on the DARPA program at the Department of Defense, and it's all about high risk, high reward results. So this is down from the 6.5 billion that the president recommended for ARPA-H, although we'll have to wait to see what the final congressional budget allocates for this new program. So the Senate started to mark up their versions of the FY22 appropriations bills prior to the August recess, but only 3 of their appropriation bills were marked up in committee. So, and on August 4th, 2021, now we're still on the same slide. So, nope, go back. We're still on the budget slide. Okay, stay here, okay? So on August 4th, 2021, the Senate Appropriations Committee contained language to fund the transfer of $10 million from the DOE to NIHS's worker training program. But the bill awaits action on the Senate floor. So we'll have to see what happens when the Senate Appropriations Committee resumes their activities after the August recess. So overall, I'd say that this budget is encouraging, but I need to remind everyone that it's not final until Congress passes the budget for FY22. And as I mentioned at several of our previous council meetings, including the one last June, the good news is that there is strong bipartisan support for the NIH in Congress. So we are encouraged by what we have seen from the House, and we are hopeful that the Senate will also come through with a budget that is favorable for both the NIH and NIEHS. So stay tuned and rest assured that I will update you as I obtain additional information. Okay, let's go to the next slide now. Okay, I just want to take a minute to update you on some congressional briefings that we had since we met in June. Actually, these were meetings that happened in June. On the 14th, I met with the House and Senate Majority and Minority Appropriations staff for the Subcommittee of Interior and Environment. And this is a group that we call the Four Corners. So I gave them an update on our Superfund related programs at NIEHS and told them about our future directions for the SRP and the worker training program. Committee members expressed a lot of interest in the work at NIEHS, and my sense is that they are highly supportive of the work that we are doing at NIEHS. Also on the 24th, Dr. Gibbons and Dr. Kiley from NHLBI and Dr. Coleman and I had the opportunity to talk about our research on air pollution, asthma, and future possible directions on climate change and health. And we did this with Congressman Josh Harder from California's 10th district. He's a Democrat from California's 10th district. And I have to say, I was really impressed. He asked some probing questions about the role of environmental toxicants in asthma, and he wanted to know more about future directions in asthma research at both NHLBI and NIEHS. He was especially pleased to learn about some of our emerging collaborative efforts to create an NIH-wide strategy for addressing climate change and health. And I'll talk about this more in just a few minutes. I was also impressed to learn the extent to which Dr. Gibbons and his colleagues at NHLBI are interested in collaborating on studying how environmental exposures can be influencing the development of asthma. And I was also pleased to learn about their interest in climate change and health. So again, I'll talk about this in just a couple of minutes. And finally, I was able to spend some time with members of the leadership at the American Thoracic Society. So ATS is a great supporter of NIEHS, and I suspect many of you know, and if you don't know, I'll tell you, they are the co-chair of the Friends of NIEHS. So we had a great discussion, and I shared efforts about training future generations of scientists, and I discussed some of the details around the work we are doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also covered several other topics ranging from climate change and health all the way to the microbiome. So they're very supportive of the work we are doing, and I must say that I look forward to continuing to work with ATS to help partner with us to support research that benefits public health. So let's go on to the next slide. So I want to just highlight a few of the confirmations that have happened since the last time we met. So first of all, Dr. Eric Lander was unanimously confirmed by the Senate as the President's Science Advisor and Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. And as many of you may have heard, he will become the first OSTP director in US history to serve in the President's cabinet. President Biden wrote a letter to Dr. Lander that the, quote, science-based actions we set in motion today can create solutions for our greatest climate, healthcare, and national security challenges, and deliver a safer, healthier, and more just, peaceful, and prosperous world for future generations. Boy, that is really encouraging language. Also, I want to comment that Ms. Dawn O'Connell was confirmed by the Senate on June 24th to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. As many of you know, the ASPR is the Secretary's principal advisor on public health emergencies. Her office leads the nation preventing, responding to, and recovering from adverse health effects of man-made and naturally occurring disasters. Also, I want to comment that Dr. Miriam Delphin Rittman was confirmed by the Senate on June 24th, and she was confirmed as the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Abuse. She is also the administrator of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. So we're still awaiting confirmation of Melanie Egerin, who's the nominee for HHS Assistant Secretary for Legislation, and Christy Grimm, who is the nominee for the Inspector General at HHS. So let's go to the next slide. So I briefly mentioned at our meeting in June that the new Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or what we're now calling the ARPA-H, it's a new program within the NIH that is designed specifically to speed the development of human breakthroughs in a way that cannot be readily accomplished through the traditional NIH route or through commercial activities. There are proposals from Congress and there are both proposals from Congress and from the President to fund it from anywhere from $3 billion, as we saw from the House Appropriations Committee, and $6.5 billion coming from the President's budget, proposed budget. So it will be, the whole ARPA-H is designed to support high-risk, high-reward science in a way that will potentially catalyze disruptive thinking across many disease areas. So all of us on the leadership team at NIEHS are working to explore how we can be advancing projects that fit well within the framework of ARPA-H. It'd be nice to take advantage of some of that additional funding. So last July, I participated in a listening session. It was led by Dr. Collins, and it was all about getting input from some of our stakeholder groups, specifically the American Thoracic Society, the Endocrine Society, and there are other stakeholder groups that participated in this listening session. Tara Schwetz was there to represent OSTP, and this was one of 15 listening sessions conducted by the White House and the NIH. So there were over 5,100 registered participants for all 15, including nearly 250 organizations from across the country. And these were participants that were involved not just in the one listening session that I participated in, but all 15. So these listening sessions provided a forum for various stakeholder groups to express their views on different scientific areas that would be appropriate for ARPA-H. So we're at the point now where OSTP and the NIH will analyze the input, and we understand that this input will help to shape what ARPA-H looks like, and it will help to establish a framework for ARPA-H. So Dr. Tabak sent the IC directors an email yesterday morning indicating that they are willing to consider any additional input from anyone who is interested in providing that input. So therefore, if you have any other ideas and you want to provide input, and it's not duplicative of what your organization or you have already provided, send them an email and get it off to me as soon as possible. So Dr. Tabak asked that we provide this input no later than September 20th. So if at all possible, get something to me by Thursday, September 16th, or send me a note to let me know that you're interested in providing input, but that you need some additional time. So we'll try to get any and all input that you may have. This is a very important new program, and I suspect that Dr. Collins and Dr. Lander want to get it right. So let's go to the next slide. So last February, I described a series of leadership values that define the substance of the vision that I have for NAEHS. So these 5 values were informed by both my personal and my professional experience, as well as my passion for the science that we support at the Institute. They also reflect what I learned from my many listening sessions with staff and stakeholders during my nearly 10 years that I spent as deputy director, then acting, and then permanent director for NAEHS. Since I plan to use these leadership values as a framework to support a shared vision and to help guide implementation on the goals that follow from the 3 overarching themes in our strategic plan, I asked for input from across all the divisions at the Institute. We discussed these values with the senior leadership team, and then Dr. Michelle Bennett, our acting chief innovation officer, coordinated a huge effort to get input from a large number of stakeholder groups from across NAEHS. The 5 leadership values are shown on this graphic. They're workforce. I actually like the workforce diversity, innovation, collaboration, communication, and distributive leadership. Next slide, please. So Michelle then assembled a representative group, and I'll show you that on the next slide, that included membership from all 5 divisions to sort through the huge amounts of input that we received. They then came up with a brief summary statement that reflected the collective synthesis of what each of the values means to the staff at the Institute. So you can see here that workforce and workforce diversity, it's all about an inclusive, diverse, and well-equipped pipeline of people whose perspectives are respected and valued. The innovation leadership value is about forward thinking, cutting edge, and diverse ideas that are fostered and applied to solve current and emerging challenges. Collaboration is a big one for me. Cooperative teamwork that leverages transparent and respectful partnerships to drive synergistic engagement towards a common mission. Communication is important. It's about intentional and transparent exchange of information that is built on mutual trust, respect, and inclusion. And distributive leadership. It's about an environment that inspires and empowers the entire workforce to utilize their talents, strengths, and expertise to assume leadership, responsibilities, and accountability. So overall, as I mentioned, we plan to use these leadership values to help guide the work at the Institute. They will also be used to help shape the work that we support in the extramural community. You'll be hearing reference to these leadership values as we continue to move forward and developing, supporting, and talking about the programs at NAEHS. So if you have any questions or you'd like to provide additional input on these 5 values, please feel free to contact me. Happy to hear what you have to say. So let's go to the next slide. Of course, this was a lot of work that went into developing these leadership values statements. This slide shows the members of the values committee that Dr. Bennett put together. I just want to thank them all. And you can see that there were representatives from OD and DERT and DIR, OM, and the Dmtp. We had scientists and members of the administrative staff. So overall, thank you very much for the hard work. And it's very inspiring, those succinct statements that you came up with. So let's go on to the next slide now. So I want to provide, just take a few minutes to provide a summary of some of the work. Of course, I can't talk about all of the work that we've done at the Institute since June. But let me start off by reminding everyone of the 3 themes that provide the framework for our strategic plan, which is about advancing environmental health sciences, promoting translation, data to knowledge to action, and enhancing scientific stewardship and support. Next slide, please. So theme 1 specifically involves studying how environmental exposures impact all levels of biological organization. From the molecular, from the biochemical, cellular, tissue, organ system, model organism, individual population at all stages across the lifespan from preconception through old age. So needless to say, theme 1 is a big theme, but it's a very important theme for the work at NAEHS. So next slide. So in the context of theme 1, next slide. So I'm going to talk about some work in our 2 intramural research divisions and talk about a manuscript that was published from the extramural community. So let me start off with a summary of the work from Don Cook's laboratory within our division of intramural research here at NAEHS. So Cook's lab is interested in studying airway eosinophilia, which is a hallmark of allergic asthma and is associated with mucus production, airway hyperresponsiveness, and shortness of breath. So glucocorticoids are widely used to treat this form of asthma, but their prolonged use is not only associated with several severe side effects, but there are individuals whose eosinophilic asthma is resistant to glucocorticoid treatment. So we need to find something else. So Don and his colleagues wanted to explore whether there are novel pathways for developing targeted therapies for eosinophilic asthma. So in this manuscript, they show that UDP glucose, which is a nucleotide sugar, it's selectively released into the airways of allergen-sensitized mice after entogenic challenge. So interestingly, mice lacking a gene called P2Y14R, which is the receptor for UDP glucose, had decreased airway eosinophilia and airway hyperresponsiveness. So mice lacking this gene seem to be less responsive to this deleterious effects of asthma. And moreover, they found that a small molecule antagonist against the P2Y14R inhibited airway eosinophilia. So therefore, they found that this UDPG, the P2Y14R mechanism, is a potential pathway that could potentially be therapeutically targeted to treat asthma, especially for those individuals with glucocorticoid resistant forms of this disease. So well done, Don and your colleagues. Very interesting piece of science. Next slide, please. So I also want to feature a manuscript that was published from our second intramural research division, the Division of the National Toxicology Program. So I believe most of you know that the Dmtp has been a leader in working to identify higher throughput approaches for testing chemicals for adverse health effects. The Dmtp has pioneered the use of computational benchmark concentration determination to evaluate both in vitro and in vivo bioactivity using transcriptome analysis. So their approach is to identify the exposure at which important biological effects occur after an environmental exposure. So the work described in this manuscript extends their efforts using transcriptomics and moves into the use of untargeted metabolomics as an additional complementary and innovative approach for evaluating benchmark concentration determinations. So specifically, they use differentiated cultures of HEPA-RG cells exposed to a panel of reference compounds. They used untargeted metabolomics because it will allow the evaluation of both endogenous physiological and pathological responses to a xenobiotic. It will also potentially allow the analysis of the metabolic fate of that same xenobiotic. So in the past, untargeted metabolomics, as I understand it, has been limited for this type of application because it can be variable, and it's very labor intensive to identify individual metabolites. But this work demonstrates that a holistic, untargeted, and dose response assessment of biological responses to both known hepatotoxic and non-hepatotoxic agents can provide insights that are complementary to those seen with transcriptomics. They found that responses to the hepatotoxic agents were clearly distinguishable from those from non-hepatotoxic agents. So very well done, our colleagues in the Division of the National Toxicology Program, a very important advance in toxicology science. Next slide, please. I next would like to highlight work from our extramural community. This particular set of experiments is timely given the increasing focus on climate change and health across the biomedical and environmental health sciences communities. The focus of this work was to examine the association between ambient temperature and female reproductive capacity. Specifically, they used a test to evaluate ovarian reserve. It's a test called the antral follicle count, or the AFC. So they used a prospective cohort study design with 631 patients from the MGH Fertility Center. They studied the daily temperature at a woman's residential address for the 90 days before the AFC measurement. They evaluated the associations between temperature and the AFC readings, adjusting for relative humidity, fine particulate matter exposure, age, education, smoking status, year and month of AFC, and diagnosis of diminished ovarian reserve and ovarian disorders. So it's striking. What they found is that a 1 degree centigrade increase in average maximum temperature was associated with a 1.6% lower AFC. What their data suggests is that exposure to higher temperatures, potentially those caused by climate change, can lead to a lower ovarian reserve in human, which of course raises the big concern that increasing ambient temperatures worldwide may result in accelerated reproductive aging amongst women. So this is a very remarkable effect on health due to climate change. So let me go on now, and with those 3 articles that were published since June, if we go to the next slide. I want to spend a little time describing some of the progress that has happened in support of theme 2 of our strategic plan, which involves promoting translation, data to knowledge to action. So this theme is all about recognizing that the value of advancing health and environmental health sciences can only be fully realized through translation of our science so that it can be used by the public, health providers, regulators, and policymakers to help to inform their decisions. So let's go to the next slide. So let me start off by following up on some of the exciting recent, well, let me pause for a second and just make sure, can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I guess we're making progress. So let me start off by following up on this exciting project, a COVID-19 project that I originally described earlier this year, or actually it might have been last year. So it's called the Pandemic Vulnerability Index, or the PVI. So the PVI was developed collaboratively by Yvonne Rusin and Wei-Shui Chu at Texas A&M, Ellison Matzinger-Reif here at in the intramural division at NAEHS, and David Reif at NCSU, as well as, of course, their colleagues. PVI is a graphical interface. It allows one to call up individual counties across the US and to get immediate access to the data for that county in the form of the ToxPi card, which is shown in the lower left-hand corner, which many of us in the toxicology community are well familiar with. The key feature here is that different slices of the pie correspond to different variables associated with the pandemic. And you can see that in the left-hand column here, for example, the infection rate, the population density, population mobility, social distancing, as well as several other parameters. And more recently, they added vaccination rates. So as with ToxPi, the size of the slice of the pie corresponds to the impact of that variable in calculating a total score. So most noteworthy is that the PVI is being used by different communities to help guide decision-making. It's been used to define which communities are most vulnerable to becoming the next public health hotspot. So it also provides useful information on what drives community-specific vulnerability. Also helps to figure out where interventions should be focused and how should resources be prioritized. So the PVI is a terrific tool, very exciting. It's used for this for this pandemic, and is potentially useful for the inevitable future pandemics that will be happening. So congratulations to all of thank you to all of the investigators that are involved in developing the PVI. Next slide, please. So another COVID-related activity over the past year was work that was done by Artyom Grunstev and his colleagues in our intramural knockout core facility. So as with most other disease conditions, studying COVID-19 would be greatly facilitated by producing a mouse that is capable of carrying an infection and developing COVID-19. So as you probably all know, mice normally carry a form of the receptor protein for the virus called ACE2, which has a sequence variation that makes it resistant to the infection with the virus. So what Artyom and his colleagues did was to integrate the human equivalent gene into the mouse using genetic engineering. So he did this in a way that allows the gene to be induced to be expressed by crossing with another strain of mice that produces an activation protein, which we all know as CRE. So as you can see on this graph and at the bottom of the slide, let's see, the bottom of the slide in black. So infection of the wild type mice, again in black circles, showed no decrease in body weight, and there were no symptoms of COVID-19, which is what we would expect. But infection of the engineered mice, and in this case, there's a lot of data here. I want you to focus on the blue triangles. And if these mice showed a rapid decrease in body weight and expressed other clinical symptoms of COVID-19. So we have now exported these mice to an offsite biocontainment facility, and we'll be using them to study many aspects of the clinical course of COVID-19. So thanks to Artyom and his colleagues, this is an incredibly valuable tool, which will be shared with other interested parties across the NIH and across the biomedical community. Next slide, please. So another COVID-19 related project that I want to highlight is the work that NIHS is doing in support of the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics, or the RADx initiative. This is a program that you all may recall that I talked about in the last few presentations, the director presentations. This was launched in the spring of 2020, and it was all about encouraging innovative thinking in the development, commercialization, and implementation of technologies for COVID-19 testing. So RADx-RAD, which is the RADx Radical, was designed to support new, non-traditional, and radical approaches to address current gaps in COVID-19 testing. So Oswaldo Lozoya, who's a fellow in Doug Bell's lab in the Environmental Epigenomics and Disease Group, they developed a technique that involves taking cells from either a nasal swab or saliva sample, extracting all messenger RNA, conducting RT-PCR, and doing this in a way that all molecules are barcoded from an individual. Then the samples from hundreds of thousands of individuals are pooled, and they perform a next-gen sequencing run. So in the end, they use bioinformatics to determine which, if any, of the viral transcripts are present within a sample, which of course indicates that that individual has an active infection. And if they have an active infection, they additionally conduct an expression profile of the genes expressed in the cells of the infected individual, derived from that nasal swab or the saliva. So they use this profile of expressed genes as a way to predict biological outcomes. So will the individual that has a COVID-19 infection have a set of mild symptoms, or are they likely to be hospitalized and potentially die from the infection? So they developed a capacity to perform over 50,000 tests per run for less than $6,000 in additional costs. So very cost-effective way to do this. And they made a lot of progress since I originally described this technology earlier this year. Specifically, they have now analyzed quite a number of NP swabs and saliva samples from hundreds of donors. And to kind of cut to the chase here, they have identified a gene expression signature that corresponds to those individuals who were hospitalized with severe COVID-19 and required mechanical ventilation. This is pretty exciting. So needless to say, they are currently validating this result and will hopefully be moving this into clinical practice at some point soon. So very well done, Ozzy and Doug. Next slide, please. So I also once again want to highlight Joan Packenham, the director of the NIEHS Office of Human Research Compliance. But this time I want to highlight her for a project called Women's Health Awareness Community Resiliency, Environmental Action and Collaborations for Health Equity, something we call REACH, R-E-A-C-H. The overarching goal of the project is to identify the predisposing factors and COVID-19 related factors that contribute to adverse health outcomes within the women's health awareness population and their families. And the overall goal is to develop effective interventions to assist with disease prevention, control, and management for successful recovery and resilience of underrepresented, underreported, and understudied women post-COVID-19. So we recently learned that this project will be co-funded by the Office of Research on Women's Health. Joan was awarded her full funding request of $290,608. So congratulations to Joan, and we look forward to following the results from this very exciting project. Next slide. And of course, I want to talk about climate change and health. So we have made a lot of progress in addressing the challenges associated with climate change and health. And I believe, as all of you have heard, the president has made addressing issues on climate change a high priority for his administration. He also recognizes that there are a number of very important health-related issues that need to be addressed with climate change. So therefore, as part of his budget for FY22, and I mentioned this earlier when I talked about the budget, he made a proposal to add $100 million to the FY22 budget for NAEHS. So we're not certain yet whether this will actually come to pass, but nevertheless, we are starting to develop an NIH-wide strategy for climate change and health. And we're doing this NIH-wide because it's clear that there are many institutes and centers at the NIH that have a keen interest in this area of research. The interest goes well beyond NIEHS, and John Balbus has been a co-chair of a group together with Josh Rosenthal at the Fogarty International Center that has been involved in discussing the NIH-wide interests in climate change. So given this interest, I've taken the initiative to reach out to Drs. Bianchi and Gibbons and Glass, Gordon, Perez-Estable, and Zink to form what we are calling the Executive Committee on Climate Change and Health. So together we have re-energized that long-standing working group with over 100 members across all of the ICs at the NIH. The working group is currently co-chaired by Aubrey Miller, who stepped in for John Balbus, and Josh Rosenthal at the Fogarty International Center. And our own Gwen Coleman is providing much needed central coordination to keep all the moving parts working in synchrony with each other. This is complicated, but it's really important that we do this on an NIH-wide scale. So we have a steering committee of the working group, which has designated appointees from the ICs that are represented on the executive committee. So the steering committee is working with Drs. Miller and Rosenthal to make sure that the goals of the working group are achieved. So thus far, the working group has developed an RFI. They have implemented a monthly seminar series, and they are working on developing a portfolio analysis of the work that is currently supported by the NIH on climate change and health. And most notably, I want to point out that they are working diligently at a breakneck pace to develop an overarching NIH-wide plan for addressing the gaps in our knowledge on the issues of climate change and health. So we hope that the $100 million will actually come to pass and will be approved by Congress. And if it does, we hope that this will help to fuel implementation of that NIH-wide plan once it's developed. Will we be back in touch with you? We may be having some special sessions of this council to approve concepts of this overall plan. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. And just in the interest of time here, I'm going to say that the NIH-wide strategy is being developed, but there are several priorities that have emerged at the NIH on climate change and health. And so they're shown on this slide here. It's about supportive, innovative discovery and solutions-based research, build healthy, resilient communities by supporting sustained research partnerships, implement rapid disaster response, research response capacity, develop state-of-the-art data infrastructure, and build research workforce. Next slide, please. And before I leave this topic of climate change and health, I want to remind you that there was an RFI developed by the working group, and it's been on the street, and it closes on September 17th. We actually extended it for a couple of extra weeks. The members of the working group plan to use the input from the RFI to help develop that NIH-wide strategy for climate change and health. They need your input on these 6 priority areas, or on anything else that you want to provide input on. So I understand from Aubrey, Josh, and Gwen that the response thus far has been quite robust, but you still have a few days to provide your input if you're so inclined to do so. But please, if you have an interest or you have thoughts and ideas and you haven't provided input on the RFI, please log on and provide us that information. Next slide, please. And before I leave the issues of theme 2, I want to recognize the remarkable work of the NIEHS Environmental Career Worker Training Program. The ECWTP provides training to increase opportunities for individuals from disadvantaged and underserved communities. It has the ultimate goal of training those individuals for well-paying careers in environmental cleanup, construction, hazardous waste removal, and emergency response. And I'll tell you, if you want to talk about a government program that has been successful, This is just remarkable. Since 1995, the ECWTP trained over 13,000 workers and has achieved an average job placement rate of 70%. And we're estimating that the program generated about $100 million return on a $3.5 million investment. So it's incredible. So I'm highlighting this program today because the ECWTP was chosen as one of the pilot programs for the Justice 40 initiative. So if you're not aware of this, the White House Justice 40 initiative is outlined in Executive Order 14008. And it places environmental justice squarely on the radar screen to address climate change and its impacts. In the context of specific federal investments related to environmental justice and climate change, the Justice 40 initiative has the goal of delivering at least 40% of the overall benefits of any relevant federal investments to disadvantaged communities. So it's noteworthy that the ECWTP surpasses the Justice 40 initiative because 100% of the training activities take place within the disadvantaged communities. So I just want to move on here, but congratulations to the ECWTP for being chosen as a pilot program for Justice 40. So let me move on to the next slide. So I have a few more minutes to just go through some of the progress that we've made on theme 3, which you will recall is about enhancing environmental health sciences through stewardship and support. We feel that success in our mission requires that we continue to provide strong stewardship of our human, financial, and infrastructure resources. And we also feel that we need to support approaches that will enhance research translation. So let me pause for a second and once again ask Nathan, am I talking to myself or is my audio still coming through?
It's still coming through.
Okay, that's a good sign. So let's go to the next slide. So I once again want to follow up on the presentation that I made last June and reinforce NIH's strong commitment to the new Unite initiative. This was established to identify and address structural racism within the NIH-supported greater scientific community. So Unite is composed of 5 committees with separate but coordinated objectives, all focused on tackling the problem of racism and discrimination in science. So as you can see here, the U committee, which is focused on understanding stakeholder experiences through listening and learning. The N committee is focused on new research in health disparities, minority health, and health equity. The I committee is focused on improving the internal NIH culture and structure for equity, inclusion, and excellence. The T committee is focused on transparency, communication, and accountability with our internal and external stakeholders. The E committee is focused on changing policy, culture, and structure to promote workforce diversity in the extramural research ecosystem. So let's go to the next slide, please. Kind of moving along here. So following the special session of the advisory committee to the director last February, there were 10 concrete actions that were approved to achieve the first set of goals for the Unite initiative. So I discussed these last June, and with the limited time that I have today, I'm simply going to say, suffice it to say that we made a lot of progress on many fronts. So most notably, we are continuing our efforts to get out and to listen and to learn from a wide variety of stakeholders. For example, you'll hear more from Gary Ellison about the efforts that are being made to reach out to HBCUs and MSIs. We want to get their input on what the NIH can be doing to advance their causes. We're also working hard to develop actionable data dashboards, and we will that we can use then to track our progress on the intramural workforce, as well as track our progress in the investments that we're making on addressing health disparities, minority health, and health equity. And finally, we are working hard to develop programs to a whole variety of different programs to spur institutional cultural change in support of inclusivity and equity. So I'll make it a point to keep you posted as we continue to make progress on all fronts. This whole topic is part of our leadership forum of the IC directors that will happen in the beginning of October. I also want to point out that Dr. Trevor Archer is the representative from NAEHS on one of these committees. And I'll actually ask Trevor if he's willing to give us an update on some of the progress that's happening. He's co-chair of the I committee. So let's go on to the next slide, please. I also want to quickly recognize some of the remarkable achievements in the Office of Science, Education, and Diversity. So Dr. Hui-Chen Lee has been working with local Wake County Public Schools as part of our Science STEM educational outreach program. And she's been providing environmental health science training for 9th through 12th grade teachers at Athens Drive High School. So I just want to say here that it's the Wake County school system received the 2021 U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon Award for reducing environmental impacts and costs, improving the health and awareness of schools and students and staff, and providing effective environmental and sustainability education. So Dr. Lee has been asked to join for a visit by the Department of Education and the North Carolina Public Instruction on October 19th. So congratulations to Hui-Chen, as well as her colleagues in the Office of Science, Education, and Diversity. Great job. Next slide, please. I also want to take a minute to congratulate Chris Long on his recent retirement as executive officer at NAEHS, and really to thank him for the 36 years of dedicated federal service. So he started his career as an EPA at the EPA as a presidential management fellow. He continued at the EPA for more than 20 years. So one of his biggest accomplishments, so if we were actually on site, if you look through our windows across Discovery Lake, there's this big EPA building there. That was actually Chris's project for managing that building project. He hopped over Discovery Lake in 2007 and became the NAEHS Deputy Director for the Office of Management. So he's moved up over the 9 years, and in 2016 was selected as the Director of OM and the Executive Officer of NAEHS. So he's had lots of accomplishments, and I just don't have the time to go into all of them, but I'll say on top of everything else, he has had a personal passion around making sure that the NAEHS lives up to our name and that we are achieving awareness of environmental awareness of the way that we manage our energy and our facilities. And on top of everything else, he's probably one of the most likable members of the staff. So we're all going to miss him, although we hope that he will come back with some regularity, have lunch, and interact with his colleagues, former colleagues here at NAEHS. And by the way, he is truly a rock star, not only in the work that he did as the executive officer, but in his retirement, he has his own rock band. And so he will be performing, I guess, on a regular basis across Research Triangle Park. So next slide, please. And upon Chris's retirement, we have made a number of moves to fill we moved Mitch Williams, who was previously the deputy director, a deputy executive officer. We moved him into the role as acting executive officer. We moved Scott Redmond into Mitch's former position and moved him into the position as acting deputy executive officer. And we moved Alicia Holly into Scott's former role, and she will be moving as the acting budget officer. So I just personally want to express my appreciation for their willingness to step into these acting roles and provide some continuity to our administrative functions as we search for a new permanent executive officer for NAEHS. So next slide, please. I also want to recognize Sharon Beard, who was recently promoted into the role as branch chief of the NAEHS Worker Training and Worker Education and Training Program. So Sharon served as the acting branch chief since the retirement of Chip Hughes at the end of 2020. So she first came to the Worker Education and Training Program in 1994 as an environmental science and management fellow, and she has been great. So we're really appreciative that she has been selected as the branch chief for the Worker Education and Training Program. It's just been a pleasure working with her. Highly competent, and it does just remarkable work. I also want to announce that Commander Mark Miller has been named the lead for the Dmtp Workforce Development Strategy. So Miller previously served, as many of you know, as Dr. Birnbaum's chief of staff throughout much of her tenure as director. So it's noteworthy that over the past couple of years, he stepped up and provided support for various functional responses on the part of HHS to the unaccompanied children humanitarian mission and to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. He was recently recognized with an HHS Secretary's Award for Distinguished Service for his contributions to the COVID testing and the COVID testing and diagnostics working group. So well done, Mark. Next slide, please. I also want to recognize Liz Garcia Peterson from the Metabolism, Genes, and Environment Group. And I also want to recognize Sinai Ratan from the Reproductive Developmental Biology Group. They have both been named Postdoctoral Research Associate Training Program Fellows. It's called the PrEP program. So over the next 3 years, this prestigious award will pay their salaries, buy needed research supplies, offer training and leadership skills in grant writing, and foster a sense of collaboration with other PrEP fellows through networking events across the NIH. So congratulations to Liz and Sinai. Next slide, please. I also want to recognize the recipients of the Casey Donnelly Externship Awards. So these awards are made by the Superfund Research Program and are named in honor of Casey Donnelly, who is the Department Head of Environmental and Occupational Health at Texas A&M University. So the purpose of these supplements is to provide current SRP-funded graduate students and postdoctoral researchers with translational and transdisciplinary opportunities and experiences. Fortunately, I don't have the time to go through and to mention and comment on each of the awardees, but the details are there in the written report. Just want to say congratulations to all of the awardees. Next slide, please. So I also want to acknowledge Cassandra Hain, who was awarded the K99R00 Mosaic Award. Dr. Hain will be mentored by Robin Stanley, and you'll hear more about Robin's work here in just a few minutes when she reports on the later on as part of the DIR presentation. The Mosaic program is about maximizing opportunities for scientific and academic independent careers. It's part of NIH's efforts to enhance diversity within the academic biomedical research workforce. So I also want to acknowledge a K43 award to Temi Adigi, who is a visiting fellow in the Wade Group in our intramural research program. The K43 is an NIH Emerging Global Leader Award, and it's issued from the NIH Fogarty International Center. The award aims to provide research support and protected time for a research scientist from a low and middle income country who holds an academic junior faculty position or a research scientist appointment at an LMIC academic or research institution. So congratulations to both Cassandra and Temi. Next slide, please. I also want to acknowledge Emily Werner for receiving the Science Communication Fellowship, which is a 9-month program for early career PhD scientists who want to maximize the impact of their work to the benefit of public health. I also want to acknowledge Caitlin Lawrence for receiving the NIH Matilda White Riley Early Stage Investigator Paper Competition from the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, OBSSR. So this award, whoops, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this award is presented to recognize emerging scientists who reflect the Matilda White Riley's vision of research excellence. So let's go to the next slide. I'm just about finished here. I also want to congratulate 17 early career scientists from NIHS who won the annual National Institutes of Health Fellows Award for Research Excellence, something we call the FAIR Awards. So these individuals receive $1,500 to attend a scientific meeting and to present their abstracts. And unfortunately, I don't have time to acknowledge each recipient, but their names and their details are in the written report. Congratulations to all awardees. So this is one slide. Next slide, please. And I apologize, I'm just running out of time. And next slide, please. So you'll see the incredible work and the 17 awardees. So congratulations to all awardees. Next slide. I also want to mention that for a second year in a row, NIH has won the top government organization award for the International Freezer Challenge. So across all of the NIH, the Freezer Challenge efforts saved an estimated 535,000 kilowatts hours of electricity per year, which is the equivalent annual electricity use of 45 US households. And most notably, NIEHS was responsible for half of these savings, which is in part attributable to the leadership that Chris Long brought to the Institute. So next slide, please. And finally, I want to announce that Dr. Scott Burchell who was an emeritus distinguished professor at the University of New Mexico in the Department of Pharmaceutical Science, died unexpectedly on July 24th in Albuquerque. Burchell held an endowed chair in pharmacogenomics and was an expert in immunotoxicology and environmental carcinogenesis. He published more than 125 scientific manuscripts and received research funding from the National Institutes of Health for more than 35 years. He was instrumental in securing a National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Center grant to establish the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Signature Program in Environmental Health Sciences. So he retired from the University of New Mexico in 2016, but he continued his research. So next slide, please. And I think that is it. So thank you all. And I will stop sharing the slides. And I am available for any and all questions that you may have. So let's see, can we try turning the video back on again and see if that works? I'll tell you what, I'm gonna turn my video on. You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So Nathan, I guess you're gonna have to start my video. And Lynn, I see that you have a question.
It's really more of a comment than a question, Rick. It's, this time in particular, when I read through the externally funded proposals, the new ones, I was really struck by the quality of that group of proposals, and in two ways that I think are reflective of the growth and the development that's happening with the Institute. And one was just the very high quality now of some of the work that's coming forth, that's bringing together the community work with some of the molecular epidemiology and toxicology, bringing the science and the community-based work together in a very strong way. And the other thing was the numbers of and the quality of the research related to climate and health. It's really starting to flourish. And I just wanted to congratulate the Institute for that. I know a lot of that is, it's Gary, it's about the work that Gwen did prior to that time, but I really do think that the community is flourishing with the new directions that the Institute is taking. And I just wanted to say that.
Great, Lynn, thank you for those comments. And yeah, I have to say, I think our strategic plan that all of you helped to create very nicely points out that it's not just about molecules and mice and basic mechanisms, but translation and building our workforce and doing all of the things associated with the three themes of our strategic plan. So it's nice to know that, at least from your perspective, and I agree with you, I think we're making some great progress. We've got some terrific investigators putting in grants, and it's terrific work. And also just in the whole area of climate change and health. I mean, we're kind of dipping our toe into this whole area, and I'm just very excited about the possibility of potentially getting that additional funding. And once we develop a plan for the coming year, maybe we can convince Congress that maybe a little extra money in the future years would be in order, given the progress that we're making in FY22. So Lynn, thank you for those comments, and I totally agree with you. And it's really a credit to members of council, the broad base of investigators that we support across the environmental health sciences community. It's a very exciting time. And as well as just adding the community engagement, I think NAEHS is really setting the standard for across the NIH. We've been doing this for, I think, longer than the other ICs have been doing it, and we're doing great work on that front. Other comments?
Everyone, there's a reaction button on the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask Rick a question, you can use the raise hand feature for that so that we can see you and recognize you.
Okay, well, let's see. Are there, I don't see any other comments coming in.
Irva.
Oh, I see. Irva, go ahead. I see you have your hand up.
I have. I just wanted to say that congratulations on bringing together the 7 different ICs for the the climate initiative. You've been talking about this from the moment you assumed the directorship, and it's really great to see that starting to develop and actually getting people committing to working on this issue in a trans IC manner, which in my observations has been not very common in NIH over the years. You know, at most there might be 2. I mean, certainly a lot of institutes will sign on to specific, you know, RFAs, but still kind of working seemingly, you know, in isolation around their particular grantees. And so this seems like a really kind of turning point, or hopefully it will turn out to be that. But congratulations for that great work. And then along the lines, to add to something that things that Lynn said, I was also impressed with sort of the breadth of environmental factors, that a lot of things that there's just not been much work or almost any work on, where people are moving in with applications that are very much, you know, basic science linked with epidemiology and just a lot of creativity and new, you know, new avenues being opened up, and a lot of really sharp young investigators. So I just thought it was really really wonderful to see some of what the applications were looking at. But so both of those points are to credit for the leadership here.
Well, thank you for those comments, and I just thank, you know, everyone who's been involved in these projects. My job is pretty easy. Although I do want to kind of cross-reference those 2 leadership values of collaboration and innovation. I think they're coming to bear here. And I'm just personally committed to reaching out. And I congratulate John Balbus and Josh Rosenthal for the decades of dedication for bringing together interests in climate change and health across the NIH. As again, I pointed out that there are 100 different members of the ICs that are part of this working group. So it's actually a real pleasure now to be in a position where we can be reaching out and developing these partnerships. Because I think that overall, the program in the end is going to be a better program. It's going to be a more innovative program. And I think the model of reaching out and working together with other IC is just going to deliver, you know, better science. And I just comment that, you know, I'm working hard to do this, not just in climate change and health, but I've recently been talking with other IC directors. I was actually struck as I commented that our colleagues from NHLBI in that briefing to Congressman Harder, they were actually, I thought they could be giving my speech on the role of the environment on asthma. And so they recognize this. And I think there's a great interest in really joining forces. So we don't have to just do it on our own. Joining forces can bring synergy, collaboration, and I think some incredible innovation to the way that we do science across the NIH. So, Irva, thank you for those comments.
Okay.
Again, congratulations to Gwen and to Aubrey Miller, who are now doing the hard work to keep all of these independent folks kind of working in synergy with each other. Terry, I see that you're next, and then Trevor also has a comment.
Okay, so
and let me just chime in here, and then we'll need to move on to our next agenda items to stay on time. Thanks.
Okay, so again, I'd also like to echo the really great support that the Institute has given to these areas. And I think one of the lessons that's been really important, at least for me and my colleagues here at the University of Washington, is the proactive stance that was taken by Aubrey and other members of the leadership of NIEHS with respect to disaster research response, and being able to position the Institute, both and extramural funded people, to be able to take advantage and to contribute to this area. And I just want to congratulate you and Linda and Aubrey on forming, I guess, that whole working group in disaster response. And I think it's been a wonderful example of how being proactive can really, I think, help to contribute nationally to this area.
Well, Terry, thanks for that comment. And I guess that means that we're supposed to move on. Was that me, Nathan, or what happened?
That was Trevor, I believe, but we muted him, and he can try his question again if we have time, or we can just leave it up.
Can we, Gary? Can we take one more minute to address Trevor's question or comment?
Yes, please, quickly, if the audio cooperates.
If not, I would say he could put his question in the chat.
Trevor, try unmuting, please.
Yeah, Trevor, would you mind just putting your question or comment in the chat box? And then I'm happy to take a look at it and answer it. So sorry, I don't know what's happening. Are you also on by phone as well as by internet audio? Because if you are, one of them has to be muted.
And I would also say if you're trying to join by webcast, to mute the webcast as well. There's no need to be joining on both platforms.
So Rick, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. We're going to move on right now. And Trevor, if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure that it's addressed. Next on our agenda is a concept that we'd like to clear. And it's Dr. Melissa Smar, and she'll be talking about environmental epidemiology cohorts designed to support workforce diversity. So, Dr. Smar?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So, hi, everyone. I am Melissa Smar, a health scientist administrator in the Population Health Branch in the Division of Extramural Research and Training. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity to discuss today's concept on maintaining and enriching environmental epidemiology cohorts to support scientific and workforce diversity. As an overview, this presentation has been organized to briefly summarize the existing cohort maintenance program and then to outline the proposed program revisions. And so as a reminder for some or an introduction to others, the goal of the existing cohort maintenance program, which is currently supported by the R24 mechanism, is to maintain and maximize NAEHS cohort investments within the environmental epidemiology community. And it does so by providing stability to existing cohorts to support the infrastructure to retain trained field personnel who are essential to continuing the ongoing data collection, preserve the integrity and quality of specimen collection, continue ongoing community engagement activities, and to support infrastructure necessary for data science and data preparation activities to facilitate broad data sharing. As a reminder, the R24 mechanism is not a research program, but supports the infrastructure needed to prepare for future research opportunities and to promote broader scientific collaboration. And so through 3 iterations of the R24 solicitation, which was initiated in 2016, the current program has an annual set aside of $2.5 million and has supported a total of 19 awards. In July of 2019, however, NAEHS published a notice in the guide to pause the program to reflect and reissue, which is the purpose of today's concept. So in summary, the RFA was originally divided into 2 main parts, the first being cohort maintenance activities, and the second being activities to enrich resource infrastructure. By the 3rd iteration of the RFA, most of the data prep activities had that were originally a part of the data enrichment activities, like specimen preservation or validation of exposure and health outcome, were now part of cohort maintenance and related activities. Additionally, the last RFA provided greater emphasis on data management, sharing, and accessibility components that were of interest to NAEHS. The cohort maintenance program has provided support for a wide range of environmental epidemiology cohorts with varying assessments of health outcomes and environmental exposures. This slide really is only a snapshot of some of the health outcomes, exposures, cohort types, and locations across the R24 cohorts. As you can see in the panel on the top left, some of the common health outcomes that are being considered are neurodevelopment and cognitive outcomes, metabolic, and birth outcomes. Additionally, some of the common exposures that are being assessed include air pollutants, metals, and pesticides. The R24 cohorts range in population size from as small as 300 to as large as 35,000 participants. These cohorts include childhood cancer and autism cohorts, community cohorts in response to environmental contamination, and many maternal and child cohorts, just to name a few. Additionally, cohort locations include Africa, Asia, Central America, and North America, and involve both rural and urban communities. And so this slide we included just as another visual display of the wealth of valuable data that is being collected and maintained by these R24 cohorts. With exposures presented across the rows and outcomes in columns, you can clearly see here the wide range of multiple exposures that cut across many health outcomes. And furthermore, just to highlight some of the activities from the R24 cohort, these R24 resources have been essential to enhance the data collection and value of cohorts for future research projects in a manner not supported by other research grant mechanisms. So for example, Dr. Susan Penny and team are enrolling and collecting data for 800 next generation cohort members of the Fernald community cohort. Doctors Catherine Hoyo and Susan Murphy are expanding the follow-up of the newborn epigenetic study, or the NAEHS study, to include ages 11 through 17 years of age. And Dr. Robert or Bob Wright and team have improved geocoded data in the progress cohort by reconstructing residential address history of participants from pregnancy to 24 months post-pregnancy. Dr. Catherine Metier and team have used R24 resources to enhance data sharing for 2 existing NAEHS supported studies on childhood leukemia in California and Guatemala. And by doing so, they've improved relational databases, developed a database for tracking data requests, and designed a website for data sharing. Another key point to notice here is that by enhancing the infrastructure of studies in both California and Guatemala for broad data sharing, this will contribute to emerging areas of childhood leukemia-focused research and provide insights underlying the observed ethnic disparity of childhood leukemia risk in Latin American populations. The R24 resources have also supported enhanced cohort outreach activities. Dr. Michelle Marcus attributes the success of the Michigan PBB cohort to community engagement and partnerships. And so using these resources, she and her team have maintained regular meetings with community partners, and community partners provide insight on research logistics, which is evident by the addition of a community member with data science skills. Dr. Erin Hayes has utilized the citizen science approach for soil analysis and has developed a plan to provide individual report back of blood metals data to participants and families in the community's actively researching exposure study, or the CARE study. And lastly, Dr. Brenda Eskenazi and colleagues utilized the R24 to subcontract with the local arts and multimedia group in Salinas, California, to teach the Chamacos Youth Council members how to make 3 public service announcements focused on intervening on Latino women's exposure to potentially hormone-disrupting chemicals during their daily cleaning routines. These PSAs were created both in English and Spanish, which also highlight the importance of language justice, and are another example of utilizing the R24 award to maintain a strong community-based participatory research model in ways that may not have been originally feasible through other research mechanisms. And so taking the time to pause the reissue of the RFA has allowed us to reflect on the program challenges and facilitators to date. So grantees have reported that community engagement and sometimes participant engagement is often challenging, but the community engagement supported by R24 has been critical for keeping community partners and participants engaged, especially during the current COVID pandemic. Grantees have also shared some of the data challenges that they've experienced with regards to data science elements, including updating existing publicly available data with additional cohorts, and along with the need for a gold standard for data structures or vocabularies for environmental health sciences. Additionally, there remains a need for more individuals with data science skills, as identifying these individuals was also reported as a challenge. But for us, it highlights potentially a scientific workforce training need. And lastly, while grantees have made remarkable progress towards data sharing activities, some have mentioned, and we in program have noticed, the challenges of building awareness for data sharing beyond their usual and or local networks. Also, during the time while we've been assessing the lessons learned from the cohort maintenance program, we have also been continuing to wrap our minds around the concepts of race and structural racism in the biomedical enterprise. And through ongoing efforts and recent initiatives like listening sessions with researchers at minority serving institutions, discussions with our current grantees, those that are recipients of the Diversity Supplement Award, and other stakeholders, more attention has been directed toward understanding and closing the racial gap in NIH funding and the underrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the biomedical workforce. We also recognize that representation is not only necessary for scientific workforce, but in the science as well. With racial and ethnic minorities making up nearly 40% of the US population, inclusion rates in biomedical research studies are only estimated to range between 2 to 16%. And furthermore, while some studies have investigated differences in exposures and health outcomes by race, we are definitely becoming more aware that race alone is not enough, as race is not a risk factor, but racism is. And as such, there remains a need to better understand the role of upstream factors, social determinants of health, and structural racism in the context of environmental exposures and health outcomes. And so therefore, we are proposing the continuation of the cohort maintenance program, but with more emphasis on the goal of creating stable funding for cohort maintenance and data sharing, but not only to enhance the value of the cohort, but also to improve the scientific and workforce diversity by enhancing the breadth of populations represented in scientific inquiry, promoting widespread data sharing, and enriching scientific collaborations by supporting opportunities to directly enhance the diversity of research teams working in existing epidemiology cohort studies, and by providing increased access to these valuable epidemiological resources to reduce barriers to racial equity in the biomedical research workforce, and many of these that are faced by underrepresented minority researchers at any institution. We envision emphasizing the program goals in the RFA by supporting the maintenance and resource infrastructure enrichment activities to include activities like the continuation and enhancement of sample collection and existing cohort repositories, but to be more inclusive of underrepresented populations, especially for newer active applications coming in from active cohorts. However, for renewals or perhaps those cohorts who are no longer actively recruiting, activities may also include the addition of necessary expertise to integrate structural racism data into existing research efforts. Additionally, we propose to refine the enrichment of data management and data sharing components to de-emphasize data science elements like development of data ontologies and making them more interoperable with other databases, but to focus more on supporting data preparation to facilitate data sharing, especially for those newer applications coming in. And for those already existing cohorts with data that are really ready to be shared, placing more emphasis on broader data sharing for the capacity building and investigator development of underrepresented or understudied minority populations. And so the NIEHS will continue to cross-reference these cohorts with epidemiology catalog that exists. We will continue to maintain the cohort maintenance program website that was developed to build awareness of R24 cohort resources. And we will continue to manage monthly webinars for the grantees to discuss the challenges and facilitators of enriching these cohorts. However, we also envision a greater involvement of program going forward, especially in the management and coordination of cohort data sharing activities. With regards to underrepresented minority investigator development opportunities, including ideas around diversity supplements for ancillary research and potential pilot projects. And last but not least, we also envision more program involvement with the development of or maintaining community engagement efforts. Given this extensive programmatic involvement, we are proposing that the resource-related research projects cooperative agreement, or also the U24 mechanism, would be another way to support the cohort maintenance and enrichment program. And as in previous iterations of this program, we propose a solicitation through a request for application with a single receipt date for 3 consecutive years. Applicants can ask up to 5 years of funding at a direct cost not to exceed $250,000. We are also proposing a set aside of $2.5 million per year for this program, consistent with the previous RFAs. And so in terms of timeline, pending council input, we propose to release the RFA this winter with the earliest start date of December 1st, 2022. And I know I'm running out of time, but I wanted to include this slide because although it is a work in progress, we have been working with the program analysis branch to develop a logic model that will help us develop program metrics of success and evaluate the short and long-term impacts of cohort maintenance grant activities, especially some of the additional activities we're planning to incorporate this time around, as highlighted in or darkened, I guess, in bold text with some of our outputs and how they will help us to achieve our proposed long-term and short-term impacts. And so with that, I would like to briefly just acknowledge the ongoing efforts of my colleagues in the division from both the Population Health Branch, the Program Analysis Branch, Scientific Review Branch, as well as the Genes, Environment, and Health Branch with the current program, but as well as their assistance with developing the current concept that we're discussing today. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I would like to turn it over to today's discussants of this concept, Drs. Lynn Goldman and Dr. Irva Hertz-Pachotto. Thank you.
And thanks to you, Melissa. And I think that what Irva and I agreed on is that I will lead off, and we've kind of divided this up a little bit. But I want to just start by saying that this concept in terms of continuation of an effort to maintain and enrich these environmental epidemiology cohorts, I think we both agree it's a very important effort by the NIEHS and really should serve as a model for all of NIH. These existing cohorts are of critical importance in terms of understanding over a life course how whether it's genes, the environment, other factors, social factors, racism, impact health. It's so important to have the longer term follow-up and to maintain these cohorts. And I think that we both as epidemiologists recognize how difficult it is just by cobbling together R01s and other kinds of grants to provide the solid fiber that is needed in order to maintain these cohorts. We also, and I will say myself, very much like that by now bringing in the issue of scientific and workforce diversity, that the NIEHS is bringing to reality the implementation of their commitment to racism and health, addressing that head on. And I hope that we'll see this in other concepts in the future. And in particular, and I do appreciate, I think I noticed, Melissa, a change in the title, that the title of the concept that we saw was to support workforce diversity. But I saw on your slide, you said scientific and workforce diversity. And I think that's very important. I was concerned that it not just be about workforce, and especially given the amount of attention that this concept paper is paying to issues around making sure that the cohorts themselves are diverse, that they're collecting information from diverse populations, that they're actually collecting information about racism. Another concern that I wanted to raise is about how then it will be possible to actually implement the goal of making the workforce more diverse. And I think there are many features or many aspects of the concept paper that are putting out ideas for how that might work. I'm pretty sure that you're going to learn how to do it by actually doing it as well, that you don't know in advance what you're going to receive in the way of proposals. But I like the idea of course, partnering with MSIs, although we don't have MSIs everywhere in the country, but also researchers who are from underserved minority groups. That's very, very important as well. Underrepresented, I meant minority groups. So I'd make a point about the idea about bringing to these cohorts more consistency about in terms of if you made the informatics, the data science, that this program may be able to learn from ECHO, which is investing a lot of money into how to do that with an existing set of cohorts. And there might be the ability to export some of what they've learned and that they've developed into this program. I think given that, I think you do have quite a bit of NIEHS involvement in that. So with that, I want to turn things over to Irva, maybe to start over with the issue about the idea of broadening the access to biorepositories and data, especially from minority communities. So I'm going to cede the floor to Irva.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Yes, and thank you, Melissa, for really great description of this concept proposal, that I think both Lynn and I feel like it really fills an important need, and that there's the maintenance of cohorts over time becomes difficult sometimes just because the science of these longitudinal studies, we're still really learning how to do that and how to really do it and capitalize on early investments. I think the question of maintaining these cohorts has become really highlighted by some recent work on the whole concept of developmental origins of health and disease later in life. And there's certainly lots of examples where prenatal or early life exposures we're now learning make a difference in outcomes at ages 50 and 60 and really late in life. And so the value really can't be overstated, I think, for maintaining these cohorts. Within that, then turning to this issue of the communities and diversity in cohorts, I think one thing that could be strengthened in the concept proposal is that it's not just the outreach and getting consent from communities, but going really deeper and having communities engaged in really the direction of the science and making clear what their priorities are for the use of their data, their specimens, and the how will their lives be improved, how will the next generation's health be improved. And so I think emphasizing that engagement as really the directionality of inputs going really both ways. And then, the other thing I think we can't, we can't always know what the value of the data and the specimens that we're collecting will be, because in some cases the concepts, the molecular mechanisms, the tools haven't even been developed yet. And we see that happening again and again, that we collected data 25 years ago, before I think the word epigenetics had even been invented. And now we have an entire field that is really linking environment and genetics through those epigenetic marks. So there's really tremendous value, and it's sometimes hard to communicate that to our institutions that say, what are you doing? You've got 30 freezers, and are you really using all those specimens? And just a lot of maybe you can just toss some of that stuff. And we're sitting here as epidemiologists saying, no, this isn't for immediate clinical care of an individual. This is an investment in really future science that really is really critical. So, and I can tell you, I'm getting some pressure right now for some of our freezers. So that this is, and I think that engaging communities in that long term is also a way to really make the science more and more responsive to the communities, and more useful in addressing the health disparities and the environmental injustice that's out there. So that's my comment.
And if I could just add a point, and I think I've really said it all, but that when we have data that were collected ostensibly for one purpose and then later become very, very useful for another purpose, it can be very important to go back to the community and make sure it's okay with them, not just individuals, but the community as a whole. And I'm thinking about some of the lessons that have been learned. For example, the Havasupai Indians who were happy to participate in a study about diabetes and were very, very unhappy when it turns out their samples were then used for studies about alcoholism and mental illness, even with individual consent signed, but without that community on a community level being aware of what that was about and consenting to that. And so I think that, we want to encourage the sharing. I want to open up data and biorepositories to broader groups, and especially to minority researchers. We also need to do that in a way that honors the self-determination of communities, and especially communities that are minority communities that are very identifiable. And so anyway, but I want to just, hand things back to you, Melissa, but I think that, what you're hearing is a very strong level of support for this concept. It's important, and it's, I think, kind of unique in the whole context of the NIH.
Thank you both, Dr. Goldman and Dr. Gary, do we have time to answer?
Yeah, let me just get a couple of comments and questions in, and then we'll take a vote. Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, Lynn and Irva, for your thoughtful comments. Marla, and then Bob.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for this presentation. It was really awesome. And I have to highlight the interest in supporting activities in between research grants, because in the literature, it has been very clearly pointed out that the issue of extractiveness from academia in vulnerable communities is one that has exacerbated distrust in science and distrust in government and all that stuff. So I really wanted you to expand more on what you perceived as possible relationship building activities, considering that public engagement or community engagement is a long process, not a project. So in the context of our funding structure that is so project determined, what would it be like to fund community engagement activities in between projects? That's my first question. And my second question goes to something that Lynn just said. What is the involvement of the IRB community into the design of this concept? Because it seems to me that IRB processes are going to be very impacted by this type of new approach to community engagement.
Thank you for that great question. Honestly, I think some of what I'm envisioning or what we've been envisioning is already happening in some of the cohorts that's already being supported by the R24. When I think about the work of, Dr. Eskenazi, just as an example, and the Chamaco's Youth Council, and how not only are the Youth Council invested in choosing what the different topics, and they picked the topic of Latino women's exposure to hormone disrupting products during daily cleaning routes, but the R24 is allowing that team to also go on and hire some of the youth council members as paid researchers to be scientists in their own communities and study the research that matters to them long-term as well as short-term. And thinking of all of the data that's being collected in between these larger research awards and how that data could also probably support, and we've actually heard from others too, it supports a lot of unfunded, I guess you could say, studies that go on to present opportunities for training, whether it be of community members who want to discuss or look at other questions, or trainees who have ancillary research questions. And so I think the community engagement, it was already a part of the previous RFA, but I think having some time to discuss with actually, or hearing some of the community engagement core comments that we've had in listening sessions, and knowing that community members want to be more involved in some of the same issues that both Dr. Goldman and Hertz-Pachotto mentioned, with the discussion of where does this data go forward? Where is the limit of what we want to be shared and not? And so these are really great points that we'll take into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. So that we can stay on schedule and have our break, please keep your questions and also responses concise. So I'll ask Bob and then Trevor, and then we'll take a vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. That was a great presentation. I'm an Asian American, and I have more of a request than a question. Too often we get left behind. Very little of the NIH budget is dedicated to Asian health, and I would actually like it to be explicitly stated that we're included in the RFA. That's my request. I could go on, but that's my main request.
Thank you for that request, Dr. Wright.
Thank you, Bob. Trevor?
So hopefully we've solved the audio problems. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'm very supportive of this initiative. I think one of the biggest problems we have in environmental health sciences is being able to continue with cohort studies when the initial grant that funded that cohort runs out. So I think this is really very important initiative. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to raise is the issue of community engagement. So when one is doing cohort studies that involves a community, especially an environmental justice community, it might be important to make sure that any measurements made on those participants make their way back to the participant. It's no different from taking a blood test and actually getting a blood test result, but it has to be interpreted in layperson's language so that the participant will actually understand what their susceptibility or risk might be to a health outcome. And second, I think it goes beyond just giving the data back to the individual. I think if it's a particular community involved, then there should be a community report that goes back to the community as well to assess what the health effects might be for that community.
Okay, thank you, Trevor, and thank you all for your for your thoughtful comments and requests as well. I'd like to make sure that we move forward right now and take a vote on approving this concept. So may I get a motion that we approve the concept maintaining and enriching environmental epidemiology cohorts to support scientific and workforce diversity? Marla, thank you. Second, Bob, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, thanks. And please go into your electronic council book and vote in favor or that you disagree or abstain. And I'm looking at Liz. Yes, okay.
You're good.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Next on our schedule is a break, and then we'll have a presentation on whole person health at 1:45. And I apologize that we went just a little over. If we can be back at 1:47, ready to go, that would be fantastic. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, thank you. See you in 10 minutes.